Hi everybody, this is Louise Fletcher with This Painting Life, and today I am with Alice Sheridan, who is one of my favourite artists, and I'm so happy that she's here. Hi Alice.
Hello, nice to be here.
So my first question for everybody is, how did you become an artist?
So we could start way back from when I was 4 and I left home early one morning to go to nursery school and nobody could find me and they didn't know where I was. And I had tootled off along the road and I was sitting on the doorstep waiting for nursery school to open because today was painting day and I wanted to get to the easel on time. Um, yeah, apparently that's true. Then I did graphic design as a degree. I loved art at school, and I did it as a 4th A level because I was only allowed to do it as a 4th A level because art as a 3rd one doesn't count. And I spent all my time in the art room, but yeah, doing fine art, it wasn't really what I wanted to do at the time. So I went off and I did graphic design as a degree, which I loved, and that's a proper job. And I did really enjoy that. But then I stopped. I stopped when we had children. I stopped, and we bought a house that was pretty much derelict. So I kind of put my creative energies into that, and then we did it again with another house. So 2 babies and 2 houses later, and I had a big patch of postnatal depression that was quite hard for everybody, and I had started going back to life drawing classes and just enjoyed that ability to switch off.
Yes.
And to really just get lost in what you were making and drawing, and it was that connection between having to think and concentrate and what you were doing. I just really enjoyed that, and I started painting at home, and I did one short painting course, and then we have an open studios. And I thought it was this big application process, and I applied to do that and they accepted me, which I thought was like a huge pat on the back. It turns out it isn't at all. They let anybody in, but I didn't know that at the time. So that was the first thing that I did. And it went very well, but I certainly wasn't calling myself an artist at the time.
That was going to be my next question, because we've been discussing that in my group.
Yeah.
About whether you can call yourself an artist. So when did you get brave enough to call yourself an artist, and what was it a big shift for you to actually say it to people?
Yeah, for a long time I didn't know what to call myself because that felt like way too big, far too big. And I just, I wasn't operating on that scale, whatever scale I thought we needed to be operating on at all. And I was, after I'd done open studios a couple of times, I went back and I did printmaking, and I was doing both simultaneously. And so artist still felt like too big a title, but I just didn't know what I was. And then I think there came a point where I realized that I loved printmaking and some of the things about it, but I really missed the color of painting. And I felt at the time that I had to choose to a degree, not forever, but certainly for a period of time, throw your cap in the ring one way or the other. What do you really want to do? And so I came back to painting, and then for a while I managed to call myself a painter.
Right.
So that was my first step, to call myself a painter. And of course then you get all the like, what you mean, you decorate.
Yeah, that's what I said.
But calling myself a painter seemed to be easier than calling myself an artist. So I would say it's only in the last maybe 18 months that I've said that with any degree of confidence at all.
That's so interesting, because for those who don't know, Alice has a group on Facebook called Art Explorers, and it's a great group. And when I joined that, would have been about a year ago, I think, when you began it, maybe a year ago, a bit less than a year.
I think I only started it back in, was it February? No, it must have been a little bit before that.
Yeah, maybe January. But I remember, I just thought you were like the fully fledged, this is like the artist, Alice is the artist. So that just shows everybody that if you call yourself that, then you are that, as far as everybody else is concerned. It's just when you're not brave enough to do it.
Yeah, and that group, it was really funny. I think I'd had that group set up with a different name for quite a long time.
Oh,
And
right.
I think I set it up at one point with a different banner. And I think I just did that very quickly. But doing that group header banner with a picture of me in it,
Yeah.
or that felt really like impostery.
And yeah, there was me. I was just, oh, Alice is here and she's going to guide me on this journey, which you have. You massively have, because I found you at a point when I was just, I'd been on one workshop that really lit me up and got me excited about painting with acrylics, but I was lost as to my way. And then I found you, and I knew I want to paint like that lady. That lady paints amazing. I want to paint like that. And then you were so nice and you were so accessible. And then you set up that group and I joined that. And yeah, so you've been like my, without trying to be, you've been like my kind of art guardian angel all this time. And so it's amazing to think you were feeling like an imposter. And I think I saw Michelle Obama said today that she sometimes feels like an imposter. So
And I was listening to a podcast and I was walking this morning, and it was about a lady who had decided to be a stand-up comedian at a later stage in life. And somebody said to her, you know, they were talking about fear of public speaking. And she was saying, you know, I've done events and like huge people like Michael McIntyre. And she said, he paces the stage nervously. And she said, you know, we call it fear, and actually we should just call it adrenaline, because it's just what happens. It's just the reaction that we get in our body. And if we call it fear, then we don't like it. But if we just say, okay, this is just the adrenaline, you know, what works for me to get through this? And that's very different, because that's in advance of a particular event. And I think we get that as artists. I know I massively get that. And I don't know if anybody follows me on social media, I think I have spoken about it, that I'm quite happy about sharing all the stuff at the beginning, because you have all the potential then. Like, all the potential of a painting is there at the beginning. Like, nobody's judging it at that point. You can, here it is, it looks a mess, this is fine. I've never had a problem with that. When it gets close to the end, and when you've actually decided to call a painting finished, and that patch where you're kind of getting everything ready to show it, that for me, I've recognized now after a few cycles, is it's not difficult. It's just recognizing that is part of the cycle. And for me at that point, it just feels like I need to protect myself a little bit more, because I know that that's when I'm potentially a bit more fragile, perhaps.
right.
And once it's out and up and on the wall and hung, I can take anything then. I can take anything at that point. I can take people saying it looks like it's a dog's dinner, my child could have done anything at that point, because I've got it up and it feels okay. But it's that in-between stage where you finished it and you know you can't go back, and you don't want to work, which of course you could go back to it. But at some point you have to say, this is complete for me now.
Yeah.
Between that stage and getting it up on the wall, that's my tricky stage. And I think it just kind of kicks in every time. But after a few cycles and after a few times of doing it, you learn to go, haha, we've been here before. This is what happens. You know, it's not going to last forever.
Oh, that's so interesting. But you're okay once it's up. You're okay. Even, and have you had anybody say my child could have done this?
I haven't had anybody say that deliberately. Sometimes people talk to each other, or they talk to their friend behind their hand, and of course you don't know if they're saying, oh, I really love that, but it's far too expensive, or I wish I could buy that but my husband wouldn't like it, or this is awful, can't we move on? And I tend to just assume that they're saying nice things. That's my way of dealing with it, is just assuming that they're saying nice things. And because I think, again, I judge from my own behavior. If I'm at an art fair and there's somebody whose work I don't like, I don't take the time to stop and pick holes in it. I just keep moving until I find somebody whose work I'm interested in. And I think that tends to be the way that it's gone. Probably partly going back to open studios. Sometimes there are people and they're doing the route and they come in very quickly and they look for quick 10 seconds and they're out, because we're in quite a compact area. But usually people come if they've already seen an image and they've already pre-selected you to a degree. So that is certainly a nicer way of doing it than what's hard at an art fair is when you're there and people are just walking by and they're giving the last 3 months of your life, like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
2 seconds and they've gone. It's the way it is.
Yeah. I love that idea of, well, I love the idea of thinking the negative people who might be negative might also be positive, because we don't know, and we tend to think the worst, don't we? We don't think the best.
Yeah.
But for anybody watching who's exhibiting their work, how do you mentally deal with the 2-second people who don't even look?
I just feel that they're not my kind of people. And, you know, we're all entitled. I mean, I don't love every art that's out there.
Yeah.
And there's some art that I'm interested in and I appreciate, but I wouldn't want in my home. People buy art for all sorts of different reasons. I think what you can't do is, I think it's very difficult if you get into the habit of making assumptions about who will necessarily be a buyer. And when you have a little bit more experience, sometimes it's easy to tell, but I'm constantly surprised. I'm still constantly surprised by who actually turns around at that moment and says, great, let's do it. I want to buy it.
Right.
So I always go at it from a point of view of, have conversations with people who are interested, and the people who don't stop, they're just not interested, and we can't worry about that. You know, we're not going to be of interest to everybody in the world. Maybe 15%.
Yeah.
You know, of people who were there that day will be interested, and that seems pretty good odds to me.
Yeah, I mean, if you I read somewhere someone said, if somebody doesn't like your painting, let's say somebody you know, and they don't like what you're doing, do they have brilliant taste in everything else? Like when you look at their house and their spouse and their car and their television programs they watch and the music they like, do they have perfect taste? And in the case of one particular person that had said something upsetting to me, the answer was no on all of those fronts. And then I was like, oh, so yeah, I don't have to worry about that, because they just don't have my taste. They wouldn't like it.
But I've also had the opposite, where I've seen somebody's work at a fair and it's really not only is it not my cup of tea, but in any senses of the way I might look at a work for artistic merit, even if it isn't what I want to do, for me, this is just not there. It's not. And then I delivered a painting once to somebody's house, and they had one of these postals and paintings there too. And you know, that for me was a real learning, because it's not even like what you say, is that, you know, there are people who've clearly got taste and people who haven't. People mix and match, and if I look at what I have on my walls, I choose a huge variety of different things. It is endlessly fascinating. It really is fascinating, and that's why I do love to be able to take work to people personally for that reason.
Right.
And to meet people. I had a meeting with somebody today, and it's just, you know, it's lovely to be part of that kind of process. But it's very difficult if you start tying yourself in knots trying to foretell who those kind of people are going to be. It's very difficult, and it all goes a bit screwy up here, I think.
Yeah. And I think once you realize it's nothing about your merit. It's like the same way that people fall in love. Two people can meet the same woman, two men can meet the same woman, and one falls madly in love and one couldn't care less. And it's not anything to do with the woman. So it's the same with painting. It's not anything, it's to do with the person and what they bring to it. And all you can do is try and make your paintings the best you can by your standards, and then hopefully the right people will find them, the people who respond to that.
I think that's the most important thing, is while we might not always be, you know, 100% confident or, you know, have that in our work, because there's always an element of doubt. But when you get to that stage and you're hanging something, or you're deciding what you're going to include or what you want to show people, if you need to be able to find that confidence and enjoyment in your own work, because if you don't enjoy it, you're never going to be able to transmit that and share that when somebody's asking you about it. So that's always what I look for. And I think often the tendency can be like, I've made 20 paintings, or let's say 20, I've made 20 paintings and I really like these 15 and these 5 I'm not so fussed about. And people just go, well, who knows? Somebody might like them, so I'll hang all 20.
Yeah.
And I would say, choose the 15 and leave the 5 and just hang the 15, so that when you have it, you have this feeling that you feel, I made this. And quite frankly, anybody who makes something out of nothing, that's a pretty special and it takes quite a lot, and it's a talent to do that and to bring it together and to have the bravery to show it. And if you can get to that place where you can feel that enjoyment and confidence, it's much better to do that and to learn to be your own I call it being your own curator of your work. And it doesn't mean that those 5 are no good. It just means that if they're going to kind of drop your flow, for want of a better word, it's probably better just to keep them. You can go back to them perhaps.
Yeah.
Or keep them for another event, or maybe they're just not quite suited, or they don't quite sit with this family of work. But I think quite often artists have a habit of like, I'll just put everything in there. I know I did it. The first event I did, I was like, I just put everything in there.
Yeah.
And it probably wasn't the best policy.
So how has your work evolved from going back to the open studio, the first open studio, to now? How has it evolved?
It's very interesting. I think there are elements that I still enjoy. So it's still connected with the landscape. But at that point, I felt that to do something that was connected with the landscape meant that it had to be a painting of the landscape. Mm-hmm. And that's where I was drawing, and that's often where I still draw, although it has to be said less than I did. So even then, it wasn't really ever about painting a scene. I don't remember even then. Maybe there were some sketches that I thought I'll take into a painting, but still the painting took on a life of its own. And I was working really small then. Mm-hmm. Now it's much more to do with connecting with, you see, it's changing all the time. And I think at the moment it's also on a pivot point of change, which is difficult and interesting. So let's say in the past year, it's been about using the paint and bringing it back to a feeling of being in a certain space, mm-hmm. or place or degree of recognition that people might find in that. And quite often it's interesting to see that there are matching up points that I might look back through my photo feed or like look back through my sketchbooks and I see a more direct link, but right. I wasn't aware of it while I was painting.
Right.
Now, again, I think I'm on the edge of something that is another step on from that. So it's going to be even less landscape related, but I don't know what that is yet.
Right. So if you don't know what it is, how do you know change coming? What tells you there's a change coming?
I think there's a degree of I always want to keep myself on my toes a little bit, and like one of my things is always learning and always stretching, and I think I have a degree of understanding about my own work and the way that I work that has developed over the last 18 months, that has meant that I know how to resolve something in a way that feels satisfying. And I'm just aware that that potentially means I don't ever want to be painting to a formula.
Right.
So I deliberately throw things in to stir it up a bit. So often at the beginning, I will deliberately, like when I first started painting, I would paint with colours that I liked, and often it was too harmonious. There wasn't really anything of interest in there because it was a bit too predictable. So one of the things that I've been doing over the last year or so is deliberately starting paintings with colours that I don't like, because then I have to work out a way to resolve that in a way that feels satisfying for me. But I'm just aware that I might have begun to have a little bit of a system about the way I paint, and I want to do that.
Right.
So it's weird because, yeah, I don't know what next year is going to bring.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I might be talking, you might be watching this and saying, in 6 months' time, and going back and saying, well, the paintings you're making now are still exactly the same as you were doing before. But, you know, in my head, maybe the approach is going to be different.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you find that starting any series of paintings when you don't know what's going to happen, do you find that, going back to this scared or exciting, do you find it scary or exciting, or both?
Both. Definitely both.
Right.
I do usually start with some kind of play that is not related to a painting. So I'm not planning a painting, but I have a couple of things that I really only ever do at that time. So I have a big A3 sketchbook that I call my messy book.
Mm-hmm.
And it started off, it was going to be black and white only, but that I think lasted all of about 2 pages. So other colour goes in there, but that's almost like a mark making, loosening up book. And then I have other areas where I play with a collage, or sometimes just very tiny little black and white grayscale drawing thumbnail sketches that's just about dividing space up, and just doing that, getting into the habit of doing that for maybe a couple of hours each morning. It just gets me into the headset of, I suppose, that ability to create something from nothing.
Yes.
So if you start off with a little blank 1-inch square, you know, anybody can cope with filling in a 1-inch square with marks.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a 1-inch square, and then you can draw another one, and you can fill another one in, and you start to kind of see, you get a little bit of a progression of, like, the first couple are usually, and I usually do these on loose sheets rather than in sketchbooks so that they're totally disposable. But the first ones, everything feels awkward. And then you start to get an idea of, like, things need to go towards the edge, or this needs to be darker, and it just starts to become more expressive and more determined. And I think when I've got to that stage, then I am happy to go onto the paintings themselves. But again, there's no plan. It really is literally just chucking paint around at the beginning. That is total child's play, real total child's play.
And at what point then, from the child's play, do you start to turn that into a painting?
It changes, and I think one of the big things for me was acknowledging that it was just okay to work this way. I think we all start with so many darn stupid rules in our head about, like, I still have a really good painting has to take hours and hours and hours. Now, my paintings do take hours and hours, but sometimes things happen quickly and you think, is that enough?
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, very often it is enough with a few kind of modifications and changes, because something's happened that you really love, and it's okay to kind of let that be. So that's one that I'm currently doing battle with. But when does it change into a painting? I think at that I just keep going, and so knowing that I don't have to come to any resolution within the first week or the first 2 weeks or the first 3 weeks of working on them all, and I work on usually about 12 at once. I think this year at one point I started 18 at once. That was too many.
Right.
Some of them had to go kind of into, like, painting daycare and just sit in a corner and, like, not get looked at. Yeah, so about 12 at once seems to be a good number for me to kind of hold mentally in my head. And I find that they tend to evolve in groups. So maybe 2 will kind of pair off and go in that direction, and two will pair off and go in that direction. And then I just start to get ideas. Something happens within the paint. It might be two colors overlapping or just something that triggers. And I just kind of think, yeah, I want this to be a red painting, or I want this to have a lot of space, or I want this to all be about pale colors because I haven't done that for a long time. Or and when I have start to get that nugget of an idea about what that painting is going to be about, I think that's when it starts to become a painting rather than just randomly splashing paint about. And then, so when a painting starts to get that, or when I start to have that idea about what a painting is going to become, whether it is about using a particular color or having space or experimenting with a certain amount of marks, that's when it starts to take on a life of its own and not be just pure child's play anymore.
Right. So for you, is it about focusing on, is there always one thing? So it's not anymore about a place, a specific place,
Yeah.
but it's always about one thing?
I think there's probably a hierarchy. So I think you have to keep lots of things in mind. So I'm not as pure as, for example, this is a red painting and therefore, you know, I want to explore all the different variations of red within it. But there might be a hierarchy so that red is, I call it like the hero color. So there is a kind of hero idea within the piece. So, and I do use words a lot at this stage. So it might be, this is about, and I'm thinking of one in particular called Axial, which was, I think it was around the time, I don't know if I'm making this up, where there was an awful lot of talk about the centenary of the ending of World War One, and I was doing these landscapes, and I just put a lot of red down, and there was this idea of a field of red and the poppy association and a field of blood, but I wanted to make it a beautiful painting. So it wasn't about that. It wasn't about commemorating World War One, right. But it was how can I make a painting that feels like a landscape, that is a place you might want to investigate, but it doesn't look like a volcano or a bloodbath.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of, yeah, I just get a little vague nugget of an idea like that. So I've just finished I've been working on some big ones. So there were 2 meter by meters, and I really wanted to use pale, and I've been using this bright turquoise, but I wanted some lighter paintings because I felt that about a year or so ago, there was quite a lot of my paintings that were a bit dark, and I wanted to create something that was a bit lighter and fresher, but without becoming too soft and pastel. So that was the kind of challenge in my head. And then there's a large one that I've just finished that's I think it's 48 by 36 inches, and at the beginning there was quite a lot of red underneath in that, like I say, I put colors that I don't like or I don't want to be the main focus of the painting underneath, and they just come through in tiny little patches. And something came through, and it was just this beautiful soft pinky grey, and I thought, I want to do a painting that's a pink painting that isn't so girly or sickly. So there's quite an edge to this pink. It's quite grey in parts.
Right.
So it's all, maybe it's not about defining what it is, it's about what is the challenge here. So the challenge in that one is make a pink painting that still looks like it has a bit of impact to it without being, I knew I didn't want it to be shocking in your face bubblegum pink, but I didn't want it to become too wishy-washy either. So that was the balance.
It's really interesting because I've been asked quite often by people in my group, because I've got a lot of representational artists, and they really don't understand, these people who asked me the questions really didn't understand why abstract, and what are you trying to achieve when you paint abstract, what's the point, I don't understand. And we had discussions about that, and some people say, oh, I kind of understand now. For you, what's the attraction of painting abstract, and what what for you, what is the point? So if somebody says to you, what's the point of abstract painting? What's the point?
Oh, good question. I think that for me, representational work is it's kind of an essential part of your learning and your understanding, and you learn so much, life drawing in particular, because when you've got a drawing wrong in life drawing, because it looks like you've made this really wonky person who can't stand up. And the same with still life, if you've got a wonky jar, because it's a wonky jar. And there is a huge skill in that, but I knew that I didn't want to manipulate paint in order to reproduce exactly what I was seeing. I knew that I wanted it to be freer than that. And I think for me, the challenge with abstract work is coming up with your own questions about what it's about for you. Sonny, I'm just reminded of like my son, who's now 17, but when he was about 7, he said to me one day, "Mummy, what's the point of life?" And and I, the best that I could come up with at the time was, well, it generally takes you a lifetime to figure that out, and it's probably different for everybody. You're working out what makes you tick, what you're interested in, where you want to spend your time, what's important to you. And I think probably abstract painting is similar. It's not immediately obvious. There isn't you can get this right or wrong. So you have to set your own criteria, and you have to set your own boundaries, and you have to look at what your own interests are, and somehow kind of figure those out or solve them. And I think that's where the crossover comes for me, and why I think that it's going to be endlessly interesting, and why I'm like, my biggest fear is being like tied down to having to remake the same kind of paintings.
Right. Because
I don't want to do that.
How is it working on commissions from that perspective, which is something I've never done? But how is there, do you find that limiting, or are the people you work with generally quite flexible?
I haven't done a huge number of commissions. So when I was first starting painting, and I just got in conversation with somebody, and she said, "Oh, it's my husband's 50th. Can you make a painting for him?" And I was talking about kind of having clues within the landscape, and she wanted a painting that was of the Lake District, but also had like clues about each of them in it. And it was quite fun to work on. Now, when I look back on it now, it was really quite mechanical and constrained, I guess. But she was over the moon with it. He was over the moon with it. Every time I see her, she still tells me about it. But was that really an anxious thing to do? Because I was still trying to figure out my own way of painting at that stage, and I think it was too soon. More recent ones I've been a lot more confident with, because it's been people who've come to me and they've said things like, "We've been watching your work for a while and we really like the way you paint and the way you approach it." And they have been okay. So I have said to them, "I cannot show you an in progress shot, because it looks like a dog's dinner at that point, and you're just going to freak out and say, this is not going to work." So a lot of it is about having that discussion up front, so that they know the way you work and they're comfortable with that. So the way that I've done it has been to talk about pieces of mine that they feel more drawn to or less drawn to. So one of the questions is like, how landscape do you want it to be? Do you need a horizon line?
Right.
And if there's, is it more about the land or more about the sky? And to talk about, the colors and the feeling that they want in it. And then the way that I do it is, I say, you're not held to buying it, and I will show it to you when it's got to a point where I am happy with it as a painting. And if you don't like it at that point, I'll keep it. I'll just include it in my other work. So they don't feel tied in, and I don't feel tied in, because for me, the criteria is still the same, which is, am I painting a painting that I'm satisfied with?
Right.
So I was just talking to a couple today, and I'm actually going to work on 2 for them. because she was so loose. I think we're totally on the same page, but it was really quite loose. And I just think that she will enjoy that process of being able to choose. That's, you know, you have to spend that time up front, I think. So that's, but they're few and far between at the moment, commissions to me. Well, they have been the last, I mean, it was a big,
sorry,
the one I did last year was big. It was 3 great big tall panels.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I saw the photos.
Yeah, so it was quite a undertaking. I didn't do 2 versions of that. It was like
no, that was gorgeous. Well, I was wondering as well, I would have, a few months ago when I asked you that question, I would have kind of not sneered at, but kind of made fun of people who say art should go with the decor.
Yeah.
But we have a white walls in our house pretty much all over, which I'm trying to correct, but I have to persuade my husband that we need to do that. But so I bought a painting of yours and it's gone in our living room, but it needs to move because it does not look right in there, and it doesn't, the painting doesn't show off as much as it should do because of the colours of the cushions and the rugs. It's all reds and your painting is like blues and greens. Doesn't look right. And so I put it in the spot I thought it would be perfect. It's not that the painting doesn't look good there, it's that it kind of disappears. It's not central to the room because it's clashing with the other things that are competing for attention. So
it's much easier to change a cushion.
I have a better spot for it now that'll be perfect, but you caused me so many problems. I have to have these boxes on the wall moved so that the painting can go in the spot where it needs to go. But what I was going to ask you is, so when you're doing a commission like that, is part of it to do with, well, we have a, red room, so can you do something that goes with that?
I think people who are literally choosing a painting to go with their sofa probably won't come to me in the first place, is one thing. Or they'll just choose a print that exists that they know will work and they can go with it. And this is where it comes back to sort of knowing who your buyers are without prejudging them. The people who I've come to realize enjoy my work are people who want to explore a little bit further. They don't want everything to be immediately obvious on the surface. So I've never had that kind of request, and I think that's why. So and also I don't mind that we like these kind of colors, because generally they've come to me because they kind of like the palette that I use anyway. So there's already some kind of match. But if they say, oh, we like this group of paintings rather than this group of paintings, that's fine by me, because we all have a kind of natural color that we're pulled towards. And I don't think so often it's about matching what's in their house for interior design's sake. It's about, these are the kind of colors that I really enjoy because they fill me with joy, or they make me feel refreshed or energized, and that's why they're in my house in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, this couple today, she said, we're not even living in our own house, and she said, I just know that wherever we go, wherever we end up, her husband's an architect, we'll build something, and everything else in the room will come around the painting. It won't be the painting fitting in. It will be like the other way around.
Yeah.
That's who we want.
So I have to get new cushions. No, but I've got a perfect place. I've got a perfect place for it. It's going to be much more visible where it's going to go. But that's why I sent you a photo of it yet, because I'm like, no, it's not right where it is. So I always ask everybody this final question, because I know I've kept you for a while now. We have a lot of people in the group who'll be watching this and who'll be watching it on YouTube who are aspiring artists, or who are at a certain level of art and trying to go to the next level. As you've progressed through your career, are there any pieces of advice that you think would be particularly helpful for people who are not as far along in their art journey as you are? Maybe shortcuts or just wise, sage advice you can give to people?
Without writing a book.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to do it in one sentence as well. Oh no, I'm kidding.
Okay. I think sketchbooks is a tricky thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're told to keep sketchbooks, and I think we have an idea in our head about what that should be. And I've been through the whole gamut of sketchbooks that are just about drawing, or sketchbooks that are more scrapbooky. And I've tried putting everything in one book, and then I've had a phase recently where I've kept everything separate. So my outside drawing book is my outside drawing book, and my no drawing collage book is no drawing collage. And then and they're all kind of totally different. And then I think it's changing again, and now I want to go back to having sort of one sort of crazy idea book where I stick things in and I draw those little thumbnail drawings. But I think sketchbooks can be such beautiful things, and we all know that.
Yeah.
I went to an exhibition at the RA the other day, and there was like Klimt's sketchbook, and it was like this time just like I don't care about what's on the wall. I just want to be able to look through the pages in that book.
Yeah.
And I think as a result, we can get a little bit obsessive about what we put in them. And that's a tricky thing to do. So there is something lovely about making a book, but a couple of practical things that I would say about that is, don't start on the first page and work your way through. You can start a bit haphazardly, start on page 10 or 15.
All right.
Just do a couple of marks on a page, or stick something in to discover later, or shake it up a little bit so you're not creating this beautiful thing from beginning through to end. And something else that I've had before is I've had a sketchbook that I've really enjoyed, and then I've done a page in it that I don't like, and it's like spoilt that sketchbook for me, and I don't want to go back to it. And there was at one point that I realized that I could tear that page out, paint over it, stick something over it,
Right.
or otherwise mess it up or change it. So I think sketchbooks are a great practice, but I think we need to have a degree of irreverence towards them, which is quite hard to do at the beginning when you're experimenting and perhaps being a little bit harsh on yourself with your judgment. So with that in mind, as well as having a sketchbook, I really like doing something like taking a large sheet of paper, painting all over it, maybe just ink, like 2 minutes ink drawing, and then tearing it into maybe 12 separate pages. And you can hole punch, and you can buy little ring binders, and making your own sketchbook out of loose sheets of paper, so that you can add to it or take away, or just working on loose sheets generally. Because the other thing with sketchbooks is, if you're working with paint as well, the pages take time to dry,
Yeah.
and you can only look at one page at once. Whereas if you can work on loose sheets and just put them in a folder if you don't even want to bind them yet. The other thing that you can do, of course, is pin them up all over the wall, and you get a sense of an overview of what you're interested in all at once.
Right, that's a really good idea. So instead of it being hidden away in a book, it's up there on the wall for you to see. And especially if you're, there's a lot of people who are worried about what's my style and what's my voice and who am I? I'm doing all these different things. Perhaps if you pin them all up, you would see that there are similarities between them, at least in what you're interested in.
Yeah, there's links. And also you can practice that kind of editing curation thing that we spoke about. If you can start to do that with loosening up 12 drawings, 12 things, and also take the time to look at your own work. I think we're often always racing for the next thing, or we're racing to finish, or we're racing to get stuff done, and we don't take the time to actually think, what can we learn from our own work? Why have I done this? What has this taught me? What do I need to learn from this? And to take time to look at it. And maybe if you do things on loose sheets or with paintings, look at what you've created, not necessarily judging it is wrong or marking it is wrong, but take the time to look at, I really enjoyed doing that, or within this piece, what I'm particularly liking is XYZ, and get really specific about it. So it could be, what I really like is the thin lines through this clear pale space, or what I really like is this tiny little patch of bright orange next to a big space of muted grey, and I think if you can get really precise on those things, that also helps you recognize and see what you like, and maybe give you ideas for what you can, explore further. And I think taking time to do that with your own work is really important, really important.
I think that's really good advice, because this is the thing I learned in this last year or two, is that it's what you like is the keys. They are the keys to what your voice is. And I think that when we're starting out, we think somebody else, the outside as the answers, not the inside. So you look to other artists, you copy other people, or you look for inspiration. And on Instagram, we've all done that. And you're not looking inside you for what you like. And it really is as simple as, what do you like? That's
And I think you can do it with other artists too, but I think, again, we tend to stop too soon. So we tend to go, oh, I really like that, like swipe,
yeah.
Whereas actually, if you say, I really like that, okay, so stop, spend, again, this goes back to this idea of kind of 2 seconds and dismissing it. Spend 10 minutes looking at that painting on Instagram that you've just found that you really like, and really look at it and really work out, why do you like it? Do you love the fact that they've used their color? How have they used the color in a way that's really appealing to you? And you're not looking at it in that way in order to copy it, but you're looking at it in that way in order to understand more about what that triggers in you. So is it a sense of calm in that painting? Is it is it the way that they've used particular marks, or that they've mixed particular medium, or what doesn't really matter, but if you can get to the point where I call it, it's like a kind of filter in between. So this is the thing you like, this is the filter that you're feeding it through, and then this is how it relates to you. And where we can do that with our own work or other people's work, and it takes away also from that fear of copying. So if you can take a painting that you really enjoy, and you can say, I really like it because expressive mark making, large area of space, maybe higher, a clear color hierarchy, then you've got 3 things. Then you can take away expressive mark making, clear division of space, color hierarchy, and then you've got 3 things that you can use to kind of look at your own work and think, well, if that's what interests me, do I want to use that in my own work? And how can I develop those ideas, seeing as those ideas are clearly what interests me? Yeah. And at that point, you can't actually copy that first person's painting, because you're in your own world with it now, because it's gone through your kind of filter.
Yeah, I love that, because that's one of the things that we're going to be doing on my course.
Yay!
Exactly for that reason, is finding those things that you love in other people's work, but then taking them out of that and using them in your own work in your own ways. It's exciting when you do that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Alice. This has been wonderful.
Pleasure.
I really enjoyed talking to you, and really appreciate you giving up your time to do this. Thank you.
We can have these kind of conversations all day. That's quite often do in various forms.
All right. Thanks, Alice. Bye-bye.
Thank you.